Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us for our abstract writing workshop. It is organized by the peer support team as well as the Public Health Student Association. And we are quite fortunate to have a guest speaker, Lindsay Marshall, with us here today, who's going to go over abstract writing, as well as three panelists, Marjorie, Harveen, and Conchetta, who are going to share a bit about their experiences writing, submitting, and presenting an abstract or similar concise academic writing. So just a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with logistics, and then we're going to head into the writing portion and finish up with the student panel. And we're going to end with a Q&A from the audience. And if you guys don't have any specific questions, the organizers have a couple prepared. So just a bit about myself. My name's Emma. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the writing specialist for the School of Public Health's peer support team. That is a team of 3 folks. So we also have 2 quantitative specialists, Ananya and Pratibha, and they can support your quantitative needs for stats and biostats. And I am here for your communication needs. So that can be oral presentations as well as anything that is written. And I'm going to hand it off to Maddie to talk about PHSA and logistics.
Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thank you to Emma for organizing this and for including PHSA in the preparation for this workshop. So just a little bit about PHSA. I am the president of the Public Health Student Association, and we are the official student group of SPH. We also have Emily on the line, who is our APHA liaison, and I'm going to talk a little bit about APHA here in a second. Vicenta, who is our treasurer and is also on, and then Kendall as well, who is our VP and is in charge of sending out a lot of our communications. And with PHSA, some of the things that we have done this semester include 2 general body meetings and a town hall with the dean. We've also provided volunteer opportunities in partnership with Sinai Community Institute. So things to be looking for in the spring are mentorship opportunities. We're meeting with the SPH Alumni Network here in December, and also potentially a clothing drive for like professional clothing. So when it comes to, presenting abstracts, one of the final considerations is, what you're wearing when you present. And we're going to try and do something where we can upcycle some old professional clothing so that they can get more use. So be on the lookout for that. With that being said, we're going to dive into this next section. So when and where to present an abstract. So this list is by no means comprehensive, but these are some we can look into as UIC students. This first one is APHA, which just happened last month. The deadline to submit abstracts for this conference is usually end of March. So thinking about the conference for next year in 2022, that will be something that the deadline to submit will be probably March 2022. And if you're working with a professor who does research, they'll likely remind you and maybe ask for your support. And if you're doing research independently, this is just something to be aware of. You'll be notified at the end of May if you've been accepted. And I've just included a link here to past and future APHA meetings. This year it was in Denver, and it was like a hybrid virtual and in person. And, I imagine that might also be the case for 2022. I've also linked here at the Minority Health Conference, which is UIC specific. And this focuses on research that is geared towards uncovering and eliminating the health challenges encountered by marginalized populations. The spring dates are yet to be announced, but more information can be found at this link as well. And then UIC SPH Research Day, which I know I have participated in, and I think a couple others on this call have as well. But this is a great, I think, practice opportunity for drafting an abstract and creating a poster to go along with it. And the spring 2022 dates have yet to be announced, but basically this process entails submitting a very short letter of intent, an LOI, at the beginning of April. It takes like 2 minutes, and usually you get at least 4 or 5 emails reminding you to submit. So they sometimes also extend the deadline. So if you miss it and then you see it's been extended, I encourage you to apply, and then the posters due 1 to 2 weeks later. I've included a link here for more information about the awards and guidelines, but it is a great opportunity to just practice and kind of get some good feedback too from the judges who comment on the posters and decide the awards. So how to present an abstract. Emma has linked a wonderful resource in the resource slide of this. It's from Tulane, and it goes specifically into the step-by-step process that is required for submitting an abstract to APHA. So I encourage you to look at that slide deck when you get a chance, because the guidelines on this slide are mainly around authorship for submitting an abstract. And you should just, make sure when you do, you include all the names and people of those who did the research, and you take into account, how much time they invested in, conducting the research, the analysis, and interpretation of the findings, usually with the person who has, spent the most time being the lead author on the abstract. And they should also, include the study registration numbers if applicable, and, all sources of funding for the research and the presentation, as well as any conflicts of interest should always be noted when submitting research, and if space permits in the abstract itself. And then with this next slide here, funding opportunities. So when it comes to presenting a poster, SPH does offer a limited number of conference poster printing grants to SPH students. So the link here is provided on what that process looks like and how to submit. But grants are awarded every year, I think up to $100 per request, with 50 of them. So if you are looking to print a poster for research you've done for conferences outside of UIC, this is a good resource to look into. And then I've included the OVCR funding portal for that includes all open opportunities. It's university-wide, and the links also to subscribe to newsletters that contain information about funding opportunities for research. And then finally, although not necessarily specific to research, we have here the UIC scholarships and awards SNAP system. So that is also something to look at as the fall semester ends, as the awards from this system are typically paid out in the spring. And I think I just rambled really quickly. So if you have questions at the end, I'm going to stay on the call, but I will turn it over to Lindsay, who is the graduate writing specialist and academic advisor. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Maddie. That's a really excellent overview, and leads right into the section that I want to talk to you about, which is the actual crafting of the abstract. And a lot of you have read tons of these, right? This is like a part of being a graduate student, and many of you have also crafted these. So some of this might be a bit of a repeat, but feel free to jump in with any questions or any additions that you might have for moves you found to be successful or things you've done that you have found to work pretty well for drafting abstracts. So first of all, I should introduce myself. My name is Lindsay Marshall, and I use she, her pronouns. I am housed currently in UIC's Graduate College, but I'm also a PhD candidate in English. And I should say that my dissertation is very much in line with public health. I write about the opioid crisis and addiction harm reduction. So even though I'm an English person, and that might sound a little bit weird to have this be your dissertation topic, it is. And so I'm especially happy to have been invited by the peer support team and by the PHSA to participate in this workshop. So thanks very much. In the graduate college, I can help with any sort of writing that you might have to do, not only for conferences, but for fellowship applications, job materials you might be crafting. And I've helped tons of UIC graduate students obtain fellowships and awards from Fulbrights to NSFs. So please reach out to me. I'm happy to work on anything, talk about anything, and my contact information will be available at the end. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything or if I can be helpful. So this first slide shows good old Kevin from the office trying to use as few words as possible to get his point across. And this is the general ethos of an abstract. So you want to be concise, of course. The call for papers and for abstracts will usually be between 200 and 300 words. The aim, of course, of the abstract is to summarize your research, your methods, your approach, and any potential outcomes you see your research reaching. The abstract should be freestanding, meaning that you shouldn't need to have a huge, broad context or read an entire journal article to understand what the purpose of the research is and what you're proposing for the conference or for the article, right? Whatever it is that you are writing the abstract for. And it should follow a certain kind of chronology. It should offer a little bit of background or history, briefly explain your methods, anticipate results or discuss results that you've already achieved, and then end with a discussion or conclusion. And I would emphasize here that one additional characteristic is that the abstract shouldn't be defined by field-specific jargon. And that sounds a little bit counterintuitive at first, right? Because if you are applying for a public health conference, then public health jargon or lingo or vocabulary will make sense. That's true to a certain extent, but just be sure that the language you use will be accessible to and readable by a pretty wide range of readers, because you're never going to be quite certain who will be reviewing the abstracts. And even if you have an ultra specific subfield in public health, it may not be the case that those reading your abstracts will be a part of that same subfield. So really try to be sure that you're not using too much jargon when you're crafting the abstract. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is a particularly annoying slide in some ways because everybody hates drafting. Some of you are drafters and some of you are those who just jump right in. I am the latter. I tend to jump right in, but I'm trying to get out of this habit because I found that I kind of get stuck in the introduction, or I get stuck in a particular method section, and then I don't move back out, like zoom out to the abstract itself. So if you jump right into the writing of the abstract before beginning to take some smaller steps, it can often lead to abstracts that are just too long, where you're going to have to cut hundreds of words. There's too much information, and it can end up feeling confusing for those who are reading or reviewing. So rather than trying to come up right away with your full sentences, with your argument, trying to explain the full trajectory of your methods, write out some simple bullet points, some brief phrases that will help to sketch out the subheadings that are going to be the guide or the roadmap. So go into the drafting of the abstract with a plan, even if it's a small one. And I've found too, just as like a bonus of the little note-taking before you begin to draft the fuller abstract, that it kind of relieves some of the anxiety of the abstract crafting itself. So if you feel like you have a few notes before you go in, that's incredibly helpful. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, subheadings are kind of a map. They're going to tell you the order you want to follow in the abstract, as well as the general trajectory of the order. So you've got some variation depending on the type of research you're conducting, the type of method you use, or the particular project, but generally speaking, subheadings are a really effective way of organizing any abstract. And those 4 traditional modes of organization are the background, the methods, the results, and the discussion and conclusion. Next slide, please. So we've got the background, which includes a problem statement. And here you'll notice there's going to be a great deal of variability. So we move into an example of an abstract. There's 2 slides that we'll show you and have you take a look at that show these in action, right? So we've got a full problem statement, method section, the causal analysis, the results, which contain a policy analysis potentially, though this could vary by your kind of project, and the discussion, which includes some recommendations. And the part that is probably the most variable is that 2-sentence mark. So you will see when we show you the abstracts as samples that 2 sentences could actually look more like 5, or 2 sentences could look more like 1. It just depends on your project and the way that you write. But this is a pretty good guideline for keeping certain points tailored, and you don't go down the rabbit hole of trying to explain methods too deeply without saying anything about the background. Next slide, please. Okay, so the subheadings here first is content, and we've got the background, 2 sentences, and this is absolutely crucial. So when you are thinking about setting up the background for your readers, you want to be sure to lay out the who, the what, and the how very clearly right away so that no one is wondering what the topic is, how you are planning to do this, what you're thinking in response to the topic. And of course, for your field, it'll generally be a public health topic. Perhaps it is one that affects populations or specific populations within a city, within a country. You're going to want these things to be really clear right from the outset. And you also want to have a research question or even a research statement, as well as your objective. So you can see some of the really helpful tips that Emma and the rest of the team have included here, right? These sub bullet points that list some words, which we'll talk about more later as well, that are kind of guiding words that help you to think through how these sentences might look. So evaluating, analyzing, testing, or investigating, those kinds of words, which are infused with a lot of like action or purpose, should be included frequently in this background section. And then methods, of course, you're all intimately familiar with thinking about and talking about and writing about methods. So here quickly, you want to say what those methods are, how you have tried to answer the question or respond to the statement that you've included in the background, and be really specific about whether your methods are quantitative, qualitative, and what your mode of data collection is. Next slide, please. And this is just a brief note from my view on backgrounds and methods. Always the background should be more than just an attention getter. We all remember like high school English classes where you were supposed to have a hook in that intro paragraph. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in higher level graduate school academic writing, the problem statement should be something that gets the reader's attention. But this isn't just by being part of a hook or something mind-blowing, right? It's to show your readers why it is really essential that they care about your topic or that it should matter to them, and to preview how your research is going to intervene and impact. And that seems really crucial because it's an attention getter that is not shallow, right? But that matters in your field and in the world more broadly. And in terms of methods, if it's appropriate to include, numbers will always help your readers to picture your methods a bit better. And I'll say more about that when we get to some of the sample slides that show actual examples of successful abstracts. So even if your numbers are not entirely decided upon, right? This is an abstract, not everything has to be written in stone. You should include a few just to give a sense of the scope of the project that you are conducting or are proposing to conduct. Next slide, please. And then we've got the subheading content, but that is based on results. So 2 to 4 sentences here. And this looks a little bit longer typically. So the background and methods might be briefer, and then this is a fuller discussion. So again, the 2 sentences can quickly zoom out into 4, 5, 6. And this is what has happened, right? The findings that have come about as a result of your research, or that you anticipate finding if the research isn't completed yet. And you want to emphasize the findings that are going to be most pertinent to your conclusion or to your claim. And then last but not least, of course, the conclusions, where you're stating the answer to those questions, you're including the implications, and you are offering, if it is appropriate, some recommendations. Next slide, please. So here we have one sample, and it's broken down into the sentences. And as you can see, it's color coded. You'll have access, by the way, to all of these slides later. So you can go back and reference how each of these sentences or sections fits in with the larger subheadings and those 4 categories that we've been walking through. So I'm going to give you just a moment to look through this slide and to make some notes about things that you notice or that stuck out to you about what this author did. So here in blue, we have a pretty direct statement of a claim. Community partnerships can improve access to care for low income and disadvantaged populations. We have then a further discussion of the background or the context, and it's just clear right from the beginning what this author is going to be discussing and what their position is. Then in this method section, notice the numbers that are there. So we have a sense that there are public housing authorities or community partners. We get a pretty good sense of what the research is aiming to do and the modes that are used. We have then that pink section that talks about some of the results and the conclusion. And I would just say as one extra note about that blue section about the background or the problem statement, that it is often useful, and this is one of the most important things that I get the chance to talk about with a variety of students from a variety of departments when we work on applications for fellowships or grants, whatever it is, that beginning sentence, in addition to naming the how and the why and the what the problem is that you're investigating, can, if it's appropriate and if you have the space and the word limit is not too draconian, you can offer a brief contextualization of the scope of what you're going to be discussing. So just as a very brief example, in my own research in writing about the opioid crisis or the overdose crisis, I might say something like, in 2016, at 64,000 deaths a year, overdoses became the #1 cause of death in the United States. Last year, in 2021, that number grew to 100,000. So you can immediately see that in a rather brief period of time, right? We have some dates, we have some numbers, people are already, they've been hearing about this problem, they're invested in it. So an additional background statement or a problem statement can include some of those specifics to show the scope of this problem. And I think that the next slide shows this really well too. So take a moment to look at this slide and this abstract. So we have an ultra specific region that's being discussed. We have an immediate problem that is stated and explained. We have a really strong method section that includes a lot of numbers and specifics. It's okay in this particular version that the section in pink, the results are a little bit shorter because it's not full results, right? It's a plan for. And then we have a conclusion section that doesn't say this has been decided, this is done, but rather uses language that reflects the fact that it suggests. and that it can address. So again, you'll have access to these, but these are super strong examples of different approaches to actually working through and writing these abstracts. And next slide, please. Thanks. So I actually moved the title slide to the end, because I don't know if any of you have had this experience. I have had it and will have it frequently. The title is like the bane of my existence. I'm never quite sure how to come up with the title right at the beginning. So I typically wait until the end. It's often the case that the best titles come after you've already worked through the particulars of the abstract. And so rather than trying to start at the beginning and guess what your title will look like or how it will function, right, as a reflection of the work at hand, you can easily work to shape your title around your claims, your hypothesis, your outcomes, your expectations, and everything else that you've discussed throughout the rest of the abstract and as you drafted it. It's always helpful to wait for the title until the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lindsay, so much. That was incredibly informative. And now we're gonna jump into some tips and tricks for writing concisely, which, as Lindsay mentioned earlier, is particularly crucial for abstract writing because you are gonna have those word count limitations, and that, you wanna make sure that you adhere to those guidelines when you submit it. Otherwise, it might not be accepted. Depends on how strict they are. So one of the big ways that you can avoid wordiness in general is avoiding to be verbs. That's going to include your be, am, is, are, was, were, been, and been. And oftentimes this is just using a less active voice and it's less direct. So I'm just going to go over the first example down there, which is there is a student who is having difficulty with their essay. Is having difficulty is a little less concrete. And another way that you could say it to make it more direct and clear is the student struggled with their essay. So right there, you have your subject and you have your verb right next to one another, and it's clear that the student struggled with their essay. Next one. All right, so one way that you can minimize your usage of to be verbs is changing your passive voice to active voice. And passive voice is going to be when the subject receives the action. Oftentimes, when you use passive voice, the actor is unknown, it's not, or it's obvious, or it's irrelevant. And because the actor isn't typically specified, it can make it less clear and less direct as well. So I have two examples under there directly. So we have mistakes were made that delayed the testing for weeks. So we know that mistakes were made, but we don't know who made them. That's not clear in this sentence. Comparatively, when you use active voice, the subject is performing the action. So that's how you have that clarity. So you have the team made mistakes that delayed the testing for weeks. There you specify that the team was the one who made the mistakes. I also provided two examples below that for the sake of time, I'm just going to move on, but just kind of demonstrating that oftentimes when you use passive voice, you are going to be wordier. And here I have some examples of active strong verbs, and your word choice is going to be key when you are trying to minimize wordiness and adhere to word counts. So I'm not going to go through and read them because you will have the slide deck provided to you after the presentation, so you can look at that in your own time. Alrighty, another way that you can minimize to be verbs is avoiding starting your sentences with the it be or there be. In the first sentence, we have, it is necessary that legislators consider the proposed policy reform. That is 10 words, but you can just say it much more clearly by legislators must consider the proposed policy reform. Okay. And then another way that you can minimize wordiness is avoiding nominalizations. So a nominalization is just a fancy term for a verb or adjective that has been transformed into a noun. And that is often going to end with your ION, your TION, your, sorry if you hear my dog barking in the background, the MENT, ITY or TY, and your NESS. So that's going to be words like investigation, argument, discrimination, applicability, things along those lines. And oftentimes with nominalizations, it is more abstract and less clear. So your meaning can get lost and your audience can have a more difficult time understanding what it is that you're trying to communicate. So I have an example here of consideration, which is the nominalization of the verb to consider. So we have consideration was given to the proposed policy reform. Similar to passive voice, we don't know who was giving the consideration, and consideration itself is a bit abstract, whereas you can just say legislators, specifying the subject, considered the proposed policy reform, and that is also less wordy. And overall, you can just think through who did what, and if that's clear, you're probably avoiding nominalizations, but just try to always include who performed the action and what did they do. And then we have a couple of examples here. So we have the nominalizations on the left, and then in the middle column, we have the verb forms. So I'm just going to go over the first one. If you use the nominalization, it's much wordier. So you can say the decision to cut public benefits was made by the policymaker, or you could just say the policymaker decided to cut public benefits. Again, subject, verb.
I'll come back on for just a moment to give this fourth tip, and it's totally linked to what Emma was just discussing in the last slides. So all of these word choices that we can make to add clarity, to remove confusion, and to, of course, cut out some words in abstracts that are already impossibly short seeming. So the fourth tip here would just be to make connections, to have confidence, and to use that word choice once again, to use your word choices smartly. So in terms of connections, when it's possible, try to connect your abstract pretty directly to the conference theme or call for papers. And again, this is only if it's appropriate or if it's possible for you to do in terms of your particular project, but try that mirroring language. So for example, since the theme for UIC's Minority Health Conference in 2022 is advocacy, perhaps try to think through or use this term in your abstract and then link back to this concept in your submission. Confidence, avoid language. And this is something that so many of you will recognize because it's really common in grad students to want to like take a step back or not seem like you're bragging about your research. But I would say brag, because when you avoid language such as my research seeks to or my research aims, your research is already doing those things because you are actively doing your research. So it is just as easy and direct to say, I, or my research does do this. So use the verb right after your research. And last thing on the word choice, I know this might be controversial, but use that first person. So my research, we, I, our, we've been taught for so long to say weird things like the researchers found, when in fact, it's just you. So don't be afraid to use first person. It makes it seem like a human wrote the abstract, and people first language includes you. So don't forget to include yourself in the research. Thanks.
Alrighty, and we're gonna just gloss over these resources. So on the next slide, I just have a list of resources that are available to you through the School of Public Health as well as outside the School of Public Health. I'm not going to go through them because I want to make sure that we have ample time for our panel. So without further, oh wait, I do want to specify the next slide. I also provided some online resources that are pretty comprehensive. So they cover a variety of the topics that we did discuss. I highly recommend browsing through them. Like Maddie referenced earlier, the Tulane hyperlink is great for the process of submitting abstracts, and it clearly delineates the steps that you need to take in order to do that. So suggest that resource as well. And now we are going to go into the student panel. So we have 3 panelists with us, Conchetta, Harveen, and Marjorie. And we're going to begin this portion with introductions. Each panelist is going to have about 5 minutes to introduce themselves, their research, and their experience with abstracts or this type of similar concise academic writing. And I know Marjorie prepared a slide or two. So Marjorie, why don't we start off with you so you can go ahead and share your screen. And then I'll ask that you popcorn to either Harveen or Conchetta when you are done with your introduction.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks, Emma. Let me just get set up really quickly. Okay, can you all see my screen? Okay, great. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I just wanted to, I decided to kind of clip some examples of abstracts that I've submitted to hopefully give a visual of what some different types of abstracts look like. After all of these wonderful presentations, I am not confident that my abstracts include all of these best practices that were talked about. So if you notice anything, I would love the feedback. But I wanted to start off with an abstract that I submitted to the Minority Health Conference last year. And so as you can see on the screen, the abstract is on the left side, and then the poster that was made after the abstract was accepted is also on the screen. So I think that this is a really good example of, you know, where abstracts can go. And I know the Minority Health Conference was talked about a little bit, but for this specific example, I served as the first author. So I would just say for students, abstracts are a great opportunity to get a first authorship where you might not be able to necessarily as easily get one, in my experience at least, with a full academic paper. So I was really excited to be the first author for this. This abstract came from a research position that I have with a professor in the College of Nursing. And so I just mentioned that the Minority Health Conference was taking place and asked her if she would be okay with me kind of writing an abstract for research that we hadn't quite finished for the conference, and she was okay with that. So I think if anyone's involved in research and is interested in writing an abstract, you know, ask your PI or whoever you're working with if they're okay with that. And in my experience, they usually are, because it promotes their research and they don't really have to do much. They kind of just let you go with it and they make edits as needed. And again, it was really exciting to have this accepted and get to present it. And I will say I was also on the review committee for the Minority Health Conference. So I can say that as a reviewer, I did not review my own abstract. So I just want to put that out there. But in reviewing the other abstracts, like many other submissions, the Minority Health Conference has requirements for what they expected. And so we were really cognizant of folks who did not follow the word limit and also did not follow the formatting. And so if folks didn't follow the word limit, they were automatically not considered. And then if the formatting wasn't right, how we wanted it, like we had suggested or actually asked that folks label their abstract with certain categories and headings. And so if they didn't follow that, they were scored lower. So if there was an abstract that was, you know, maybe tied with them, but had the correct formatting, that abstract won out in the end. So I just want to mention that. And then here's another example. So this was an abstract that I did for the American Public Health Association. I actually submitted 2 abstracts to APHA for the October conference. One got accepted and one didn't. So I think that's a good reminder that they don't always get accepted, and that's okay. And again, for this one, I was first author. For the one that didn't get accepted, I was second author. And then from the abstract that was accepted, I created the slide deck that the PI for my research lab presented at APHA. And I don't have the other abstract up here, but there were different formatting requirements even between the sections. So I think it's just another reminder to like really closely follow the instructions. So like you'll notice in the one that is on the screen, we don't have any sort of headings because it wasn't asked of us to have that. And just to stay within the word count, we weren't able to have that because we were trying to fit so much in. So I think, you know, it's kind of a balance between like following the rules. If they're not asking for things, maybe compromising on that so you can include more content, in my experience anyway. And then the final one that I wanted to share is an abstract that is from a commentary that I published. So this is kind of a little bit different because the abstract comes after you write the longer piece. At least that's how I did it. I think that's the standard way to do it. But I was responsible for writing the abstract and helping to draft the paper. And then, we drafted the paper, wrote the abstract after, and then the other authors came through and kind of helped modify the abstract as well. And in this instance, it was a commentary. So it wasn't a full journal article. And it was interesting because we had to go back and forth with the journal a little bit about whether or not to include those headings within the abstract. So for a commentary, it doesn't follow a standard research paper format. And so it was kind of challenging to determine like which headings we needed to use, if we needed to use any. So after some back and forth, we figured out that it was best to just not use them. But I think, that it's just a reminder that you can always reach out to journals and they're hopefully willing to help you, in my experience, at least with kind of figuring out some of the format. So in the end, the commentary and the abstract were published in this format. And I think I'll stop for now. That's all I wanted to share. So I have experience in a couple of different channels and I look forward to answering questions and talking about that a little bit more later.
Would you mind popcorning?
Oh yes, sorry. I will popcorn to Conchetta.
Thanks, Marjorie. That was really interesting. That was super helpful. I think I've learned a lot from this presentation and even just from hearing Marjorie speak. So for one, I didn't think I had submitted an abstract, but now kind of based on what people are describing, I guess I have worked on abstracts before. But anyways, my name is Conchetta. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am here because I sort of saw myself as the flavor. I didn't think, as I said, I didn't think I had written an abstract, but I have definitely been responsible for various concise academic writing activities. Specifically, as a research assistant for the Chicago Contact Tracing Corps, I helped with summarizing proposed presentations and roundtables to be submitted to APHA, which could be definitely considered abstracts. I think the reason I wasn't thinking this was the case was because it was about, as Marjorie had pointed out, about research that hadn't been complete yet. So it was kind of just focusing not on the results, but the expected results, keeping within the word limits and highlighting more of our research question, what we wish to explore and update viewers on. And as Lindsay had mentioned, these summaries were very targeted to the described call for abstracts. So we had that targeted messaging. I didn't make any slides, but I can just copy and paste what I'm referring to because they're on the websites if you feel like looking at it, if that helps you. The second activity that I have been largely responsible for is just writing project summaries that go on websites. I did this when I worked as a project manager at the Ohio Colleges of Medicine Government Resource Center at The Ohio State. And we provided technical assistance, research, and evaluation service to state-run programs in Ohio. So similar to the summaries APHA requires, the difference, they were very similar. The difference is that the difference from most abstracts is that, they were similar in that they didn't have any findings yet. So the components of these summaries focused on activities and goals and desired outcomes. A unique flavor of these website summaries is that the purpose is to be more of an attention grabber, to let readers know that this is indeed the project they're looking for and if it's doing the types of things they're interested in. So, for example, publishing activities, making sure I included partners or any expected deadlines or timelines associated with the publication was something I was able to include on these online project summaries that probably wouldn't necessarily go into an abstract, but still was very concise. Also, for example, I worked on the Ohio Medicaid Assessment Survey, and so not only did you have to describe current work, but share the locations of past data sets from past iterations of the survey, because researchers would come looking for this data. And again, the main goal was to make sure that visitors knew this was indeed the survey they were looking for and how to get access to what they needed. So those are two types of activities that I have experienced. Can keep that brief, and if you have any questions after this, let me know. Harveen.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hi, guys. My name is Harveen. I'm a second-year medical student at the Peoria campus of UIC. this presentation has been super helpful for me as well. You know, there's a lot I can improve on and take for, you know, my future presentations and abstracts. But this year, you know, during the COVID pandemic, I did get the opportunity to present a couple of my abstracts at different virtual conferences. So I haven't had that much exposure with in-person conferences, but with virtual conferences where the format is slightly different, I've had some sort of experience, and I can go ahead and just share my screen if that's okay. If you can enable share screen, is that possible? Perfect, thank you. So I do work with the public health department at UIC at the Chicago campus, and my research is particularly focused on antibiotic prescription for spinal cord injury patients. So this is one of the abstracts I wrote this past February, and gratefully, you know, it got published in an international journal of the antimicrobial agents, which I was never expecting that. I just walked in thinking that I would present it at a conference. The conference had a tie-up with the journal, and it just got published there. So I decided it would be nice to share that with you all. So I'll just walk you through the process of how I found, you know, the opportunity and went through the whole process of coming up with an abstract. In February, I decided, you know, I have some time. I've been doing some research. Now's the time I can present something. So I just went online, did a bunch of Google searches, looked for antimicrobial, you know, conferences, looked for national ones, international ones, local ones, whatever I could find. I kind of just made a list of them in an Excel sheet, and then wrote the deadlines down for, you know, whenever their abstract deadline was. And then looked at my project, saw what the goals of my project were and what the goals of the conference was, and see which one aligned the best. Based on that, I chose, you know, one or two organizations, brought it up with my PI and said, hey, do you think it's possible that I can present at this conference? And kind of went from there. After that, you know, since I had already had like a research question in mind, and I had been doing work on this project for quite a while, I did have some data collected and some, you know, results already, kind of preliminary results in my own words written down. So it was a matter of just putting things together and writing an abstract. So in terms of writing an abstract, and I think Lindsay mentioned a bunch of great tips that I will implement as well. But what I find to be helpful is to start off with the method section, just because that's the most objective. I know what I did. There's no subjectivity in it. It's just stating, you know, one sentence, this is what I did. And then I like to go on to the results section. So that's where, you know, that's where all the statistics or whatever graphs or tables, again, very objective, no like insight from myself needed. That's what I like to do next. And then I move on to the background and the conclusion section, which sometimes do require more deeper insights from me and like discussion with my PI. So that's kind of how I like to approach it. And then the title obviously comes at the very end, because you really do want to encapsulate everything that you've included in your abstract. So that's kind of how I approached it. And then for this particular conference, I ended up, since it was virtual, we couldn't really present a poster online per se. So we ended up coming up with a PowerPoint presentation, and just presented that online over Zoom. And then the abstract was published in a journal. So I'll stop over there for now, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences. I really love the diversity of experiences. I didn't know that you guys had such a range of academic and research backgrounds before this. So does anyone, I'm going to try to open the floor to anyone in the audience. Does anybody have a specific question for our panelists?
This is Beverly. Hi, thank you so much for the great presentation. I joined, I have presented at a lot of conferences and posters and publications, and I'm always a lifelong learner, just always wanting to make sure I'm doing it and doing it right. One of the things that I heard about, using I and I did this, we were about to publish a paper, and one of the things the journal said was take out the I's, and we had concerns about, trying to make it avoiding passive voices. And so kind of found a way to say the study, the article, the researcher, and trying to use those terms to kind of update the manuscripts at the end. But is there a way that we can identify, because sometimes they don't really specifically say it on their website, don't do I and the rest, but it's generally, because I try not to as much, but sometimes do, depending, even for my dissertation, doing that. But is there ways we can know like what they need in advance, or how we can word that, or just do the I, and then if they have issues, kind of update accordingly?
Yeah, I would say that, it does vary by field too, right? So I think it used to be the order of the day that you would always avoid I, even if you were doing more humanities-based writing, and then that really changed because it seemed as if, not using I was resulting in this really strange robotic voice where the person speaking wasn't clear. And so a lot of fields started to shift away, but I know that's not always the case, especially with more scientific writing. So for me, I think the easiest approach would be if you're, trying to submit to a journal, look at other examples in the journal of the voice that gets used or the way the abstract is written. If it's a conference and you feel comfortable reaching out to the contact person, I'm always okay with just asking really transparently, is there a preference in terms of the person, right? Third person, first person, and usually people are pretty forthcoming about preferences. Does anyone else have suggestions? I'm guessing that it's probably more common in public health or even like certain subfields to use third person or to try to not use first person. Maybe it doesn't matter.
In my limited experience, when discussing projects as part of your research, it's always been a pretty easy solution to just say we, which I think lends that formality that you're looking for. But I guess technically that still is kind of maybe a little less formal. I'm not totally sure, but.
I agree with Conchetta. I think for some reason, we versus I is completely different in my mind. I think the way that it reads, I don't know why, because it's obviously very similar kind of in how they function grammatically. But yeah, I think as Lindsay, as you were talking, I was thinking about that kind of how we talk about who's doing the research, but also when Emma was talking too, kind of how, in my experience, academics often use the passive voice. So I think it's really interesting because it's things that I'm noticing where I'm going to try to like self-correct now a little bit and see, like, I think my kind of way of going about it has always been like, write it how you think it sounds best and then try to get feedback. And so, I think trying to not write in a robotic way is always positive. And so maybe trying to like just try some of these things out and seeing how far you get. And I don't, in my experience, at least for like, the Minority Health Conference and some other like smaller conferences like that, you're not going to be disqualified just because you say we or I instead of researchers. So, and with academic journals, I think they'll just provide you feedback. I don't think that they'll necessarily, say that we're not going to accept you entirely just because you used like a certain kind of like verb tense or a way of talking about the researchers that wasn't in alignment with what they prefer.
Sure. Yeah. And it does seem too, like to Conchetta's point and to yours too, Marjorie, that the we is the first person, right? Because it includes you as a member of a collaborative team, which is great. If you feel like, oh, I can't do we, then you could say the team or the team of researchers. But if you get to use I and it seems appropriate to the genre, that's really good. Samples are always good. So if you can look up versions of abstracts that have been successful as published, that's always good. But yeah, this is like an ongoing question. It's like the Oxford comma. It's real deep nerd stuff in the writing community.
Thank you so much. I think those are definitely great options, especially also going back into the previous papers and abstracts that they published, like that is known to the journal. It's a good one. Thank you.
All right, so we have about 2 minutes left. So I don't believe that we have enough time to fully delve into another question, but I would like to thank our panelists for being here. Thank Lindsay for being here. Thank you, PHSA, for co-hosting. This was really informative. I feel like I learned a lot as well. And we do have a post survey, thank you, Emily, that we're hoping everyone can complete, because we would love to hear about content that you'd like to hear in future workshops, as well as just feedback on this event as well, what worked, what didn't work, so that we can further improve future ones. All righty, but those are references as well, in case you wanted to, dive a bit deeper into the specific sources that we took a look at. But I will be sure to follow up with the recording and the slides, and I'll give everyone about a minute back of their time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.